Okay, well, welcome to our Ward 7 and Ward 8 community meeting and budget consultation. We also have a special guest later today in Dr. Chris Mackie, who will be joining us at about the 2 o'clock mark to give an update on our COVID response in Middlesex, London, and answer some of your questions. Just an overview on how the day will work. Councillor Lehman and I will both give an update on some activities in both of our wards. That'll be followed by Mr. Kyle Murray, who's with our finance staff, who will give a presentation on our budget update and consultations that are happening right now. We're looking to get your feedback, and he's going to give an overview of the 2021 budget situation and outline how you can give feedback into that process. We do have a public participation meeting coming up this week at council, and the budget debate will start on Thursday and Friday. So this is a timely opportunity for you to give your feedback on what you see before you. Then, as I mentioned, Dr. Mackie will join us. There'll be a question and answer with him after his presentation. And if there's any time left at the end, we will basically open up the mics for Councillor Lehman and I, and you can ask us anything you want, give us any feedback you like. Because we had about 110 people register for this, and there are currently 61 or so in the room, we do have the mics muted and they'll remain muted. For anybody who's participated in a large Zoom meeting, if you let 60 some odd people have free range of the mics, there's a lot of talking over each other, there's a lot of interrupting, and quite frankly, we don't get to all the content we'd like to get to. So we're going to leave it there, but you are able to use the chat feature to ask any questions you'd like. You can just type it in to the chat. You can do it openly to everybody, or you can send it privately to Councillor Lehman or myself, and we will ask those questions of either Mr. Murray or Mr. Mackie later on. The first thing, though, I wanted to start with was a recognition of a very tragic day in Canadian history. Our council has made a priority of making the city a safe place for women and girls. And on this day in 1989, there was a significant event that we're all aware of, a very tragic event where young women, Canadians, were gunned down for nothing more than their gender and being at school and trying to further their education, and it is a horrible tragedy. And we wanted to take a moment at the start of the meeting to recognize that. I'm going to turn it over to Councillor Lehman, who are going to read out the names of the victims, and then we'll have a short moment of silence.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan, and welcome everyone. On this day in 1989, 14 women, 12 engineering students, 1 nursing student, and 1 employee of École Polytechnique were killed. And we want to honor them by reading their names today. Genevieve Bergeron, Helene Colgan, Natalie Groteau, Barbara Degenalt, Anne-Marie Edward, Maud Havernick, Maurice Laguerre, Maurice Leclerc, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia Pelletier, Michelle Richard, Annie St. Arnaud, Annie Turcotte, and Barbara Kluznik Widayevitz. I'd like to just pause for a moment of silence in memory of these 14 women that were killed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lehman. We also had 2 special guests who wanted to join us today, MP Kate Young and MP Peter Fragiscatos. Both overlap my ward and Councillor Lehman's ward, and they wanted to share just a few words today. So I'll go to Member of Parliament Kate Young first.
Oh, thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Morgan and Councillor Steve Lehman. Josh, this is the first opportunity I have to congratulate you and your wife, Melanie, on the birth of your new baby boy, Archer. That's very special, and it's going to be an exciting Christmas, I'm sure, for you and your family. So thank you for inviting me to say a few words at your first ever virtual Ward 7 and 8 community meeting. It's always important to hear feedback from community members on a variety of issues. And this year, it's especially important for all of us to be listening to how people are doing as we try to get through this pandemic. There are not a lot of silver linings in this crisis, but the one thing I'm most pleased about is how all levels of government are trying to work together to manage this crisis. And it's paramount that we get through this together and make sure our community manages to get out of this pandemic stronger than before. I am London West, a member of Parliament. I'm also Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Economic Development in Southern Ontario. And so I hear daily stories of businesses that are really struggling, but also some amazing stories of businesses pivoting to make different products, such as PPEs. Of course, with the holidays coming, it's essential that we all pull together and shop and buy local. And our federal government has just launched a support local campaign for holidays that are twice as nice: shop early, shop local, and spread the holiday spirit close to home. I know I'm actually rethinking my gift list this year and trying to visit small businesses that have been really struggling through this pandemic, and I hope you will too. Our government remains committed to helping Canadians and Canadian businesses who continue to struggle and who may face more stringent health and safety measures over the next couple of weeks and months. As a proud Londoner, it's such an honor to represent the hardworking individuals who make London West their home and their place of business, and that includes Ward 7 and 8. Together, we will get through this difficult time together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, MP Young. MP Fragiscatos.
Thanks very much, Josh, and thanks very much, Councillor Lehman. First of all, to Councillor Morgan, I echo the congratulations. Great to see you become a father again. All the best to you and to Melanie, and especially on the professional side, congratulations on becoming Deputy Mayor. I think London is going to be tremendously well served. I was very happy to see you step into that role. It is great to join all of you in difficult times, certainly, as we just heard. It is hard to find silver linings, but we have to continue to strive to do that, in any way that we can connect with one another is a welcomed opportunity. I do see a number of familiar faces in the Zoom meeting here, and if I know you, if I don't know you, I hope that you are healthy and safe. I hope that your loved ones are doing well, or as well as can be expected during this very difficult time. I've participated in this meeting before when the world was set at normal, if I can put it that way. I remember when Josh first invited me, and I thought it was a really nice opportunity to listen to citizens directly. Now, certainly the concerns raised will relate directly to municipal matters, but because of my role sitting on the Federal Finance Committee, it's a nice opportunity to hear what Londoners are saying. And I will sift through the comments to see where there is relevance in terms of the federal role, because as we prepare for Budget 2021, the Finance Committee's role will be to provide recommendations directly to the Prime Minister and to the Finance Minister as to what communities are in need of. And so I recognize this completely as a municipal budget consultation, but there are issues that are bound to come up that also touch on the federal side. And so I'm very happy to participate for all those reasons. But thank you once again to the councillors for the invitation, and to all of you, I wish you nothing but the best. You know that for those that are in London North Centre, and I'm sure this applies to those in London West, you can reach out to your MPs anytime when there's a federal concern, or even if there's not, we'll direct you to the provincial and municipal representatives that represent you. So take good care. Merry Christmas in advance, and we're going to get through this thing. I promise you that.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And to the both of you, thank you. I know Steve and I have appreciated having great partners at the federal level in our corner of the city. Often folks don't know what level of government is responsible for what. And so we all work closely together to make sure, the right questions get to the right members. And so we really appreciate your collaboration and for joining us today. With that, the next phase of the meeting is a brief update from Councillor Lehman and myself separately on some activities that have been going on in the ward. And Councillor Lehman, I'll let you go first on this one.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Kate and Peter. As Josh said, they're all, especially during these times, all levels of government have to work together with communities to, as we get through this. And there is no roadmap, so a lot of this stuff has to be done on the fly, and the best way is through things like this, is having information flow back and forth between constituents and those of us that aren't to serve. To the ward items, 2020 in Ward 8 on the construction side was a little light. We did get some traffic calming accomplished on Guildwood Boulevard and a pedestrian crossover on Sanatorium by Sutton Place. We're looking for a busier 2021 with a number of projects in the works. We're going to be having some water main and sewer replacements on Tarbert Terrace, Plantation Road, St. Anthony Road, and on Valletta. And Valletta is one that I've been working to push ahead. Originally, it was scheduled for a number of years out, but back in the 60s, concrete was used in a big section of the road, and over the years it has corduroyed. So residents on Valletta, it's like a train going by with the traffic, with the vibrations rocking their houses. So I'm happy to see that we are going to be able to address that in 2021 and get that taken out along with the water main replacement there. We're also looking at getting some sidewalks in on Inverness from Deer Park Circle to Laurel Street. Allows people, pedestrians, to connect up with Oxford when they're walking. We're working on getting some traffic calming on Royal York Road, which is being used as a cut through, and some other areas in the ward as well, as we hear from folks like yourself on where action needs to be taken. Some small things, we're going to be getting some pickleball lines on our tennis courts at the Oak Ridge Optimist Park and tennis court in Old Hazelton. As far as development is concerned, this is high on our radar. There was a 22-story planned apartment planned at 689 Oxford and Capulet. Very concerning, as in that area there are apartments of 12 stories high, and this overlooks residential neighborhoods. So there was tremendous amount of public feedback, which we were able to facilitate with the city planner. And as a result of that, the developer has gone back to redoing the plans. Those will be coming forward in 2021, and there will be proper opportunity for plenty of public participation in that. Trees, we had 584 trees planted in Ward 8 last year. On the tree front, the biggest concern was gypsy moth. 2 years ago in Byron, gypsy moth started the cycle, which is about 7 to 10 years. It cycles through. And this spring migrated over to the Oak Ridge area and starting to migrate across Oxford. The city was at this point managing by asking folks to scrape the eggs off their trees, and we were doing that with the public trees as well. But definitely looking toward what's going to happen next spring, because they will be back, and we want to make sure we are doing everything we can to protect our trees. In December, our Urban Forestry Group will be getting, well, this month they'll be getting a report on defoliation and egg masses by a consultant with recommendations. that they will use to bring forth their own recommendations for what the city should be doing to council in early spring. Now, there's various opinions on treatment. Spraying is obviously one that's discussed, and people have different thoughts on that, which we want to hear about as well. You'll be hearing about a website that we have called getinvolved.london.ca. And that's a great place to voice your opinions on a number of initiatives that the city is doing. And the Gypsy Moth portion of that will be up and running in a few weeks for people to provide constant feedback. And of course, always you can email me or call me to let me know what you're thinking. I just want to close right now with just a kind of a thank you to Ward 8, particularly those that have lived around the Oak Ridge Assessment Center. Back in springtime, when COVID first struck, the city, in conjunction with Middlesex London Health Unit, acted quickly to create an assessment center to start identifying folks that needed further testing and directing them to the hospital. Since then, we've lost our only community center and arena. And also the neighbors, particularly those in Valletta, Deer Park, Tarbert, Shireen, have welcomed thousands and thousands of cars, both Londoners and from outside of London, in to be assessed. And then in the fall, we changed it to actually a testing center. And in conjunction with school opening, the traffic exploded, creating a kilometer or more lineup of cars every day at 7 o'clock in the morning. And this is a time when students were going to Riverside and Notre Dame school. We were able to work with the school boards and parents and city officials and Middlesex London Health Unit to, as quickly as we could, get school crossing guard in there, getting proper police down there. But eventually, and we were able to change the system to a by appointment only, and the appointment had to be through online. So I just want to thank the folks, especially in those areas, for their effort in this battle on COVID. You did more than your share in this fight. And I want to thank the school boards and the Middlesex London Health Unit, and of course the parents, for working together as a team to alleviate that situation. Now, this is going to be continuing on, obviously, as a testing and assessment center for the foreseeable future. So I just want to say thanks to those folks for their patience, and to those in the surrounding area. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn that over to Josh.
Thanks, Steve. I'll do the same thing that Steve did, and that's just give a brief update on a few things around the ward. And I in previous years, I've done this as a bit of a kind of regional tour because there's a lot happening. So I'll start in the Amble side, Masonville area. So for those who live in that area, you will have noticed some improvements to the park. And I'm sure you couldn't have got around the reconstruction of the road, which was necessary, but those projects did happen this year. Also upcoming will be improvements to a section of Windermere. For those who travel the area know that there are sections of that road that are very bad. There was a little extra money in the roads budget, and this was a priority area. And so they'll be adding that into the cycle and doing a bit of a resurfacing over near the top of the hill there where it's not great. In the Sunningdale area, for those who live near St. Catherine of Siena Elementary School, I can tell you I've worked with that school community for my entire time on council to get improvements to the area. That included the stop sign at Callingham, but now we have a new pedestrian crossover just east of there, which will connect the neighborhood to the north to the park to the south and create another safe crossing point for the school children who are traveling to the school from the north. As that new neighborhood developed just north of the park, there certainly was some challenges with the busy school hours in the morning and kids crossing the street, parents parking. So having an additional safe crossing point was critical. I'll talk about pedestrian crossovers a couple of times during the course of my update. So let me just note, pedestrian crossover is a safe crossing point because cars are legally required to stop when a pedestrian is queued in the crossing area. You can be ticketed if you don't. And so it creates an additional level of enforcement to create a non-monitored, by non-monitored, I mean there's no crossing guard there, but a safe crossing point with pedestrian priority. So, so if you live in that neighborhood and you see someone waiting there, you should stop at the teeth marks, you'll see them on the road, and allow them to cross. Moving over to the White Hills and Sherwood area, another new PXO near Ardsley on Limberlost. Again, part of a school connection walking zone. Most of these PXOs in my ward were identified through school travel plans that I've worked with the school community, the Middlesex London Health Unit, the London Police, and our city staff and the parents' councils of those schools on creating improvements to the walkable infrastructure for the school communities. So, so we have one of those going in. We also have in the north neighborhood there on Blackacres, we've installed some speed humps to help control the traffic flow. That was one of the early areas that went to 40 kilometers per hour. Through some staff measurements of the speed is still problematic. So some additional traffic calming was added there. Aldersbrook Gate, there is an active survey going on now for a speed hump in that access point. Cars are coming around the corner very fast, and they need to travel a little bit slower on that short stretch of road. Also in that intersection, through consultations with the community as well as the school community of the high school north of there, we've made some improvements to the crossing points right there at Aldersbrook Gate and Aldersbrook Road by including some painting on the lines, and we put in some curb cuts so that it is an accessible crossing point and clearly identified for what is an active school walking zone. If we move over to the Hyde Park area, we have some PXOs over on Coronation, where Coronation meets Hawthorne. This is one of our first sets of PXOs on a roundabout, which is a little bit different. So it's actually 4 PXOs tied together around the roundabout. So whereas a roundabout is a yield situation at most of them, in this case, if a pedestrian is there, you will be required to stop and allow the pedestrian to navigate the roundabout. This will be monitored by our staff to see if this is a viable solution at other roundabouts where there are some challenges with cars traveling too fast around them. Also in the Hyde Park area, I worked with the Hyde Park BIA on a couple of projects for those who know, in the past, we did the South Carriage streetlights. So the traffic lights are installed there at South Carriage Road and Hyde Park Road. Just recently, we added a left turn for those traveling northbound onto Gainsborough Road through an assessment process. So that improvement has gone there. I know the BIA has other suggestions on some improvements. I'll continue to work with them on those. In the Fox Field area, and this is kind of the edge of the Fox Field area, at Hyde Park and Sunningdale, we will be installing a new full-scale roundabout, much like you see at Wonderland Road in Sunningdale. There will be design improvements from the Wonderland one on some of the approach vectors into the roundabout, but that will be happening. Construction will start next year. And that will solve what has been a dangerous intersection up in the northwest corner of my ward and the northwest corner of the city. So you'll see that improvement come. For those who live in the Fanshawe, Hyde Park, Gainsborough, and Wonderland neighborhood, the city has established 3 special areas in the city to have area speed limit reductions. So the entire area has a speed limit reduction to 40 kilometers per hour. Council has directed our staff to investigate 40 kilometer per hour in all residential neighborhoods. And to do that, they've established these basically pilot areas where the whole area has moved to 40 kilometers per hour, and then speed and volume studies are actively being done in all parts of the area to monitor the effectiveness of the change of speed limits on whether drivers are actually driving slower and where other improvements might be made. And this includes assessments of all the streets, including Dalmagary, which led to some actual installation of some speed humps along it, but also Aldersbrook at multiple sections, Hawthorne, other parts of Blackacres. In that area, some parts of Coronation too. As those assessments are done and additional traffic calming measures are warranted, they will go through the budget process and be scheduled for implementation. But for those who live in the area, and I know there's a number on Aldersbrook, particularly the north end, who have been asking about assessments. Those assessments are coming, and I look forward to seeing what the results are and what further improvements we might need to make. But that whole area has gone to 40 kilometers per hour. And there will be other areas that will go there in the future as well, after these assessments are done in the 3 areas across the city. Again, just one is in my ward, but they're doing this across the city. Like Councillor Lehman, tree planting. If you've driven around the ward, lots of new tree plantings this year. The city, really tried to kick it up and do some infilling. And these include all parts of the ward. I know Councillor Lehman knew the exact number of trees. It probably approaches 800 to 900 in Ward 7, so the Fox Hollow Ravine, Gainsborough Road, South Carriage Road, Fanshawe Park Road, infilling within neighborhoods where there were gaps. Places where they have been bare streetscapes for many, many years have now had some infilling and planting of boulevard trees and or infills of trees. And so as we try to be the forest city, this is certainly one of the important steps, is to make sure that the places where we can plant, we do plant. And so that's it. I know there's a lot of big citywide stuff that we could have talked about today, but I thought for a local ward meeting, talking about some of the things that are happening around the ward would be a good way to approach this meeting. And obviously we can continue to engage on the citywide stuff anytime. Councillor Lehman and I are always available for that. I'm going to kind of read through the comments, but for now, I don't want to delay things, and I want to get on at 1:30 to the budget session, and that will be Mr. Kyle Murray, who is part of our City of London budget team. He wants to do a presentation. Now, this is the part where I will control the slides and he will talk, so I'll do some screen sharing, and hopefully this will go all smooth. Mr. Murray, you'll have to give me cues on when you want the slides flipped. And then I'll probably post, Mr. Murray will refer to some public engagement opportunities and web links. I'll try to post those in the chat. What will happen if I post a link in the chat, if you click it open and you're on a desktop computer, it will open a new window. You'll certainly be able to review that even after the meeting ends. So, so you'll see me post a few links in the chat during Mr. Murray's presentation. But for now, I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Mr. Murray. Just give me one sec. And hopefully you can now see some screen, or the presentation.
Excellent, and it's looking good to me, Josh. So thanks for having me. Thanks to you and to Councillor Lehman for the invitation today. As you kind of indicated right up front, this is a very timely topic to talk about today. We're definitely getting right into the meat of our budget deliberations this week. So definitely something that it's a good time to talk about, and certainly provide your feedback to either Councillor Morgan or Councillor Lehman on this year's budget process. So going on to the next slide, there are 2 budget documents that you can find on our website. The web link is www.london.ca/budget. I'd certainly encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to go and have a look through our property tax supported budget, as well as our water and wastewater and treatment budget documents for the 2021 budget update. So on the next slide, I thought I'd provide a bit of a refresher on the multi-year budget cycle at the City of London. So for those of you who have participated in these meetings in the past, you'll probably recall that the city utilizes a multi-year budget process. It's a 4-year budget process. And last year was the big multi-year budget process that we went through to set the priorities and the funding for the 2020 to 2023 cycle. 2021 represents our first annual update to this year's multi-year budget cycle. And typically, annual updates could be categorized as essentially course corrections. They're generally the opportunity to make adjustments or change things on the fly as we work through a 4-year budget cycle. So we are in the first annual update to this multi-year budget cycle. And typically those changes in what I would consider to be normal years, those changes typically fall into one of 3 categories. And the next slide provides a little more detail on each of them. But typically those budget amendments that you see during an annual budget update could be either a new or changed regulation. So this is something that has changed from a legislative or regulatory perspective during the course of the past year, and therefore requires us to change or make an adjustment to our budget to address. A budget amendment may also be a new council direction. So this could be something that has transpired over the course of the past year, something new that council wants to pursue or work towards. So of course, you may see budget amendments for these new council directions as well. The third category of budget amendments typically relates to cost or revenue drivers. So these are things that are changing typically as a result of changes in economic conditions. So this could be cost pressures or revenue drivers that have changed to a greater degree than what we anticipated when we approved our multi-year budget. So, an easy example I like to refer to is electricity prices, for example. If we had anticipated that electricity prices were going to increase 5% and they're increasing 10%, that may need to be something that we adjust for, just as an example. So going on to the next slide, I thought I'd provide a bit of kind of a foundation for today's discussion in terms of summarizing where we landed as a result of last year's multi-year budget process. So this slide provides a bit of a overview of the planned tax levy increases for the 2020 to 2023 multi-year budget period. And heading into this year, based on the decisions that were made by council last March, we were forecasting a 4.4% tax levy increase for 2021. The tax levy increase was forecasted to taper off over the next couple of years. And overall, the 4-year average tax levy increase that was approved through the multi-year budget was approximately 3.8%. So that's just a bit of a foundation for you in terms of where we started this year. Going on to the next slide, I was going to take a couple minutes and walk you through the budget amendments that you'll see in this year's budget process. So there are 10 budget amendments as part of the 2021 budget update. 8 of those budget amendments are operating budget amendments, and 2 of them are capital budget amendments. So the first budget amendment relates to RBC Place, London, also known as the London Convention Centre. And as you can imagine, RBC Place has been experiencing pretty significant financial challenges this year due to the inability to host events. So at the June 29th council meeting this year, council approved a 1-year deferral of the payment owing on a loan that the RBC Place has owing to the City of London. So that 1-year deferral was approved back in June. However, through the budget process, RBC Place London is now seeking forgiveness of that outstanding loan that they have owing to the City of London. This budget amendment does not have a tax levy increase. However, it will reduce the expected future inflows into one of our reserves. So that was the original funding source for this loan that was made to RBC Place London. So if council chooses to forgive this loan, there is no tax levy impact, but it would reduce what we would expect to see come back into one of our reserves. Budget amendment number 4 relates to childcare. So additional funding for childcare was approved through last year's multi-year budget process, associated with the ongoing operating costs for new licensed childcare spaces. However, with the onset of COVID, the construction of these new childcare centers has been delayed, and therefore the required funding to pay for those new childcare spaces won't be necessary in 2021. I will note that this is a one-time proposed reduction in 2021. That funding will remain in the budget for 2022 and 2023 because it is anticipated that those new childcare spaces will be ready for 2022. Going on to the next slide, budget amendment number 5 relates to the Middlesex London Health Unit. So as part of last year's multi-year budget process, increased funding, municipal funding was approved due to some cost sharing changes for public health at the provincial level. So this year, however, we were recently informed that the Ministry of Health for the province of Ontario has announced additional mitigation funding to fully offset the increased cost to municipalities for both 2020 and 2021. Again, though, I'll just note that this is a one-year proposed reduction to the budget. There is still pretty significant uncertainty beyond 2021 in terms of what level of funding will be provided to public health in future years. Budget amendment number 6 relates to the Ontario Works program. So again, this is another budget amendment that is related to COVID. So with the onset of COVID, I'm sure you're all very aware that the Government of Canada has introduced various relief and recovery programs that folks can take advantage of. And this has meant that our Ontario Works program has actually experienced a decrease in their employment-related expenses. And this is anticipated to continue at least into the first half of 2021 as well. So, you know, the expectation is that as 2021 progresses, things will start to normalize, and our spending in the Ontario Works program will start to normalize as well. But for the first part of 2021, at least, we are anticipating a slight reduction in our Ontario Works spending. So that's why you're seeing a one-year reduction in this program as well. Moving on to the next slide. Budget amendment number 7 relates to an internal service review that was conducted last year that concluded that the full costs associated with the corporate services that the City of London provides to our water, wastewater, and joint water boards areas were not being fully recovered. So the increased costs were reflected in last year's multi-year budget for the utilities, so water, wastewater, and the joint water boards. But due to timing challenges, we weren't able to get the increased offsetting revenue in our property tax supported budget. So this amendment does capture that increased revenue and results in a permanent increase in revenue and therefore a reduction to the tax levy in this budget update. Budget amendment number 8. This relates to the corporation's contingency budget. So much like all of you would maintain contingency funds for unexpected expenses that you may incur, the corporation of the City of London does the same. And we frequently review that contingency budget to ensure that, you know, we have enough in that budget for any expenses that we might see coming or those that we might not anticipate. So we've reviewed our corporate contingency budget and we have identified a minor amount of savings. I wouldn't categorize it as a significant amount, but it is some savings. And we're proposing that the budget be reduced in this area on a permanent basis as well. So we feel confident that we can manage this minor reduction despite the COVID pressures that we're going to continue to experience in 2021. So moving on to the next slide, please. So there are 2 added budget amendments, and if you're looking at our budget documents on the City of London's website, you won't find these budget amendments within the documents themselves. You'll find them as separate files listed on our website. But the reason for that is because they're very recent things that have arisen. So budget amendment number 9 resulted from the council meeting on November 10th. And it relates to the screen-based industry strategy, or also known as the film and multimedia strategy. So council has requested a budget amendment to implement the film and multimedia strategy. And this is proposed to be $200,000 per year over the next 3 years to start implementing the film and multimedia strategy based on a report that went to our Community and Protective Services Committee back on November 3rd. So this is temporary funding at this point. What this does do, though, is it allows us to implement this strategy, see how it goes, and if it's successful, then we can look at funding this permanently as part of our next multi-year budget process that starts in 2024. Budget amendment number 10 is also another very recent development. So at the council meeting on November 24th, so just a little over a week ago, council approved an implementation schedule change, I guess, for our 60% waste diversion action plan as a result of delays caused by COVID. So the updated implementation schedule obviously changes the funding requirements for that plan a little bit. And this budget amendment is intended to reflect the change in the timing of the implementation of this plan. So again, slightly shifting the timing of expenditures, but not a permanent reduction to the budget in this case. So moving on to the next slide, I mentioned there were 2 capital budget amendments as well. First one relates to RBC Place London, again, the London Convention Center. RBC Place had a building condition assessment done earlier this year, and they're making some minor changes to their capital plan as a result of this. So certainly not what I would categorize as significant changes, but certainly something that we've brought forward for council's formal approval through this budget amendment. Budget amendment number 3 relates to some repairs that are required to the material recovery facility's fire suppression system. So these were unanticipated repairs that were actually not planned for a number of years yet, but due to deterioration in this system, it has been recommended that these repairs happen sooner and as soon as next year in order to ensure the integrity of that system. So both of these capital budget amendments don't have a tax levy impact. That's I think an important thing I'd like to note for both of them. So moving on to the next slide, kind of summarizing what the impact of those 10 budget amendments would be if council approves them. So I mentioned right off the top that the starting point heading into 2021 was a 4.4% tax levy increase. If council approves all of these budget amendments, the tax levy increase for 2021 would be reduced to approximately 3.5%. So approximately a 1% reduction to the tax levy increase for 2021 if council chooses to support all of those 10 budget amendments. The 4-year average tax levy increase would remain at approximately 3.8% rounded. A lot of those budget amendments that I walked you through are one-time in nature, so they don't, in many cases, result in a permanent reduction, and that's why the 4-year average tax levy increase remains at approximately 3.8%. So moving on to the next slide, certainly we recognize and appreciate that this is not a normal year and certainly not a normal budget update. So there may be a desire on the part of council to reconsider perhaps some of those decisions that were made as part of last year's multi-year budget. It's interesting that the multi-year budget was approved, I believe, on March 2nd. And obviously our world's changed pretty drastically a couple of weeks later. So if there is a desire on the part of council to reconsider some of those decisions that were made as part of last year's budget process, We've outlined a 5-step process, and you can find this in Appendix H of our property tax supported budget, that we would recommend that council utilize should they wish to reconsider any of those decisions made last year. And this essentially would look like basically the reverse order, or working backwards through last year's budget process. So basically looking at some of those additional investments that were approved last year, and considering whether those are still things that council wishes to move forward with, given the new realities that we face. Switching gears a little bit, on the next slide, I did want to give you a bit of a quick update on our water and our wastewater and treatment budgets as well. There's really not much to say or too much to report on both of those budgets. There are no budget amendments for the 2021 water budget, and the 2021 to 2023 rates for the water service area were already approved by council on October 27th. So not much to report on that front. Similarly, on the next slide, there are no budget amendments for wastewater either. And again, those rates were already approved by council on October 27th as well. So continuing on, I did want to talk briefly as well about COVID and the impacts that COVID is having on our budget, not only this year, but also into 2021 as well. I think, certainly we're all aware that COVID is going to be with us beyond this year, and the corresponding impacts that COVID is having financially to the City of London are also going to persist into next year as well. So as it stands right now, our most recent estimate of COVID impacts for 2021 is at least 20 million. That's kind of the baseline that we're working with at this point. And more than 11 million of that 20 million relates to the impact on London Transit, and specifically the impact of lower ridership that organization is experiencing. So definitely significant financial impacts that we're still anticipating heading into next year. And in many cases, there's still a lot of areas where we just don't know at this point what the impact is going to be. A great example is our parks and recreation programs and facilities. We just don't know to what extent Londoners will be able to participate in programs, recreation programs, or attend our recreation facilities. And so, that's going to be a bit of a wild card, or a bit of an unknown as well as we head into next year. So the next slide kind of talks about how we're intending to address COVID next year. And, I think the key message I'd leave you with here is that, the 2021 budget is really trying to avoid any premature permanent changes to our budget for what we hope in many cases will be a one-time event. So, in a lot of cases, yes, the service areas are experiencing financial pressures, but we're really hopeful that once things start to normalize a little bit, hopefully in the coming year, the financial situation for those services will start to normalize as well. So what we don't want to do is make any rash, premature impacts this year until we get a little more information about what financial impacts will be more permanent in nature. So how do we intend to get through 2021? Well, we're going to do it much in the same way that we did in 2020. We'll look at potentially making temporary adjustments to service levels as we need to. We could also look at potentially deferring capital projects or making adjustments to how we finance capital projects. Of course, we need to be careful when doing that, because certainly capital projects can have an important recovery role as we look to get out of the COVID challenges that we're experiencing. So, we need to be thoughtful and mindful about any changes we make to capital projects as well. We could look at doing strategic one-time draws from our reserves or reserve funds if we need to. And of course, we're going to continue to make sure that our federal and provincial partners are very informed and aware of the challenges that we're experiencing into 2021 as well. They've certainly been great in terms of stepping up and helping us with our pressures this year. And certainly, the hope is that we can continue to partner into 2021 to ensure that there's a good awareness of the challenges that we'll continue to face. And of course, we're going to actively monitor where we land from a financial perspective in 2021, and we'll be reporting regularly to Council in terms of the strategies that we intend to use to get through the year. So that's a bit of an update on the COVID situation. Moving on to kind of wrap up the presentation, probably the two most important slides in this whole slide deck are the key dates in the process and how you can get involved. So we tabled the budget on November 17th. As Deputy Mayor Morgan mentioned, we have our public participation meeting tomorrow. That starts at 4 p.m. at our Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. So certainly encourage you, if you're able, to come out and provide a submission as part of our public participation meeting. Our budget deliberations start on Thursday and will carry over into Friday as well, if need be. And we're ultimately working towards approving the 2021 budget at the council meeting on January 12th. So last slide for me, and it's probably the most important one in the whole deck, is how you can get involved. And certainly if you have any questions or you're looking for more information, definitely encourage you to visit our City of London website at london.ca/budget or the getinvolved.london.ca website as well. There's all kinds of budget materials that are up on the website, great educational videos that help you get a little more insight into our budget process. And I'll also kind of give you a sense of how you can get more information or submit feedback as well. There's also on our getinvolved.london.ca webpage an opportunity to sign up for email updates via a newsletter. So that'll be an opportunity for you to stay looped in terms of some of the decisions that are made as part of the budget process and find out what the outcomes of the process ultimately are. If you have any questions, you can certainly call my office, Financial Planning and Policy Office, at the number on screen, or email us at budget@london.ca. And in terms of how you can submit your feedback, again, if you're able to attend the public participation meeting tomorrow, I'd certainly encourage you to do so. And if you're not, I definitely encourage you to get in touch with either Councillor Morgan or Councillor Lehman. Their email and phone information is up on the screen, and I'm sure they'd be very thankful and appreciative to hear your feedback on the budget process and the budget itself. So that's all the slides I have, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you might have as well.
Yeah, Kyle, let me throw a couple at you that have been in the chat box. So the first is about we talked about RBC Place. When they do upgrades, do they cover the costs or does the city?
So typically for RBC Place London, the historical approach has been for the city to cover the capital costs of maintaining RBC Place. So typically RBC Place has been self-sustaining from an operational perspective, but the historical model has been for the city to pay for the capital costs. So we provide an annual contribution to RBC Place London of approximately $600,000 to $650,000 per year that goes towards the capital costs of maintaining that facility.
Okay, another one is with the current inflation rate at less than 1%, how can we justify a multi-year 4+% tax hike related to people's ability to pay for this? So maybe in your answer to Kyle, you can touch on how the budgeted increase is actually spread differently across the different tax classes. Because I know, for example, the 4.4% from the current year in the multi-year budget, the 2021, actually translated to about a 2.5% increase for residential homeowners because of tax ratios and tax policies. So if you could touch on his question as well as that would be great.
Sure. So that's a bit of a two-parter. So I'll start by talking a little bit in general terms in terms of what makes up tax levy increase in its entirety. So, you know, as part of the budget process last year, I would say that council approved a lot of additional spending for a number of new initiatives that were viewed as priorities. I'm just trying to pull it up right now, but the total gross additional investment in new initiatives, new or enhanced initiatives as part of this 4-year budget cycle was in the order of magnitude of approximately $180 million. So there's a lot of new spending in a number of areas. A big one was housing and homelessness. You know, certainly that has been a big priority of council, and I believe the figure on that is north of 60 million of that amount was related to housing and homelessness related initiatives, and really trying to address those challenges that the community is facing. So, you know, another example would be you know, a lot of investment that was made in the core area, and ensuring that the core area of London is able to continue to thrive going forward. So certainly, you know, I can totally appreciate how you know, certainly inflation is a much lower rate, but I think it's important to keep in mind that included in that tax levy increase, the 3.8% average tax levy increase that I spoke about, is a lot of new investment in a lot of priority areas that council has deemed to be important over this term of council. So that's kind of the first part of my answer. And certainly the second part, and the part that the deputy mayor was referring to, was this is only one part of setting the tax levy increase and determining how that tax levy increase will be spread. So the best way to think about it is really the budget sets how big the pie is going to be. There's a subsequent discussion that will happen, though, in terms of figuring out how that pie is going to be sliced. And that is the tax policy discussion that Deputy Mayor Morgan was referring to, around determining how proportionately those tax levy increases are going to be distributed amongst residential properties, commercial properties, industrial properties, farmland, and so on. So that's a separate discussion that will occur in the winter, kind of springtime, and will certainly, I guess, formalize or determine what increase a residential taxpayer will ultimately end up seeing. So I certainly can't speak to the decisions that council will make as part of that process this year, but as was alluded to, the actual residential tax levy increase last year was more like 2%, as opposed to the 4.4%, give or take, increase in the budget last year. So certainly those tax policy decisions can have a pretty significant impact on where the ultimate tax levy increase lands for a residential taxpayer.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. And you got a thank you for that answer from the person who asked the question. So great job. I will say in the chat, there has been a number of comments related to ward-based issues. I want to recognize that both Councillor Lehman and I have council staff on the call as well who are recording those questions. We won't get to all of them. In fact, some of them are very individual questions today, but they're being recorded, and we'll endeavor to respond to them. For most people, we have your emails. Where I don't, I've pretty much written you back privately and said what's your email, and we'll get you the answer if we don't get it on the call today. There's one other question I'll ask for Mr. Murray, and then what we want to do is transition to the next part of our session today with Dr. Mackie. That is a question on the green bins. So if you could answer what the impacts are of the proposed budget business case on delaying or making adjustments to the waste diversion plan, and how that will impact the implementation of the green bin program.
Absolutely. So I think, right up front, I will say that the intention is still to move forward with green bins. That has not changed. Green bins, as of right now, are still being implemented. The unfortunate reality, though, is that we have experienced some delays due to COVID on a couple of fronts. Certainly, our staff in the solid waste area were required to pivot to other important activities back in the spring and summer in terms of just helping get us through the challenges of COVID. So they weren't able to dedicate the time or the effort that they'd have liked to in order to move forward with the 60% waste diversion action plan. The other challenge has been, of course, on the public participation side of things. There's some required public participation that needs to happen as part of the 60% waste diversion action plan, and that hasn't been able to occur for obvious reasons. So the delay to implementing the green bin has been approximately, I believe it's in the neighborhood of approximately 9 months. So the new revised implementation date is now, I believe, mid-2022. So certainly, not the best news, but on the positive front, I guess, the intention is still to move forward with that and to move forward with it as quickly as possible. We've just unfortunately been tripped up a little bit by the challenges that COVID has presented.
So thank you, Mr. Murray. I'm going to leave the budget questions there, and I will say thanks to Mr. Murray for a very thorough presentation and having most of the answers at your disposal. There probably are many other questions and answers. What I will say is the 3.5% potential increase next year, if all of the staff recommended budget amendments are passed and tabled, will be council's starting point for deliberations, and we are still in the accepting feedback portion of the budget deliberations. We have our public participation meeting tomorrow where we will listen to the public, and we won't start debating the budget until Thursday of this week. So at this point, the purpose of this, as well as the PPM, is for you to send in your feedback to us. It is great if you can send it in through the official channels. You can always email Councillor Lehman and I, as it said on the screen, but I also posted the getinvolved.london.ca/budget feedback portal in the chat as well, so that everybody can participate in that. It's really important to have the formal process, because you can tell Councillor Lehman and I what you think, but if you put it into the formal process, all members of council will get your feedback, and we're just 2 votes of many. And I'll say that's important because when Mr. Murray said that there was $180 million in new spending in the budget, I can tell you I lost votes on about 77 million of that. So these are functions of the decision making of the entire council, not the individual councillors. We all take ownership over that final decision of council, but through the debate, it is important to have your voice known to not just your local representative, but all members of council who will be weighing these decisions as well. So with that, we're going to transition to the next phase. I will say the clerk is texting me because she's very good. And she said, you can also send your comments to sppc@london.ca, which is the official way to put feedback into the committee meetings that we debate the budget at. So not just send it in through the portal, but you're welcome to email sppc@london.ca as well. Clerk Saunders, is that what you were going for? I know that you're just tuning into the meeting, but.
Perfect, thank you for that.
All right, thank you. Councillor Lehman, I know Dr. Mackie is, it looks like he's on the line. I've made him a co-host, so I've kind of handed over part of the keys to the meeting to him. The only thing I'll say, Dr. Mackie, is when you leave the meeting, don't leave the meeting for everybody, because Councillor Lehman and I offered to chat at the end with the time we have left. But I'll let Councillor Lehman introduce you, and then we'll let you take over from here. So thank you, and again, thank you, Mr. Murray, for the presentation. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Josh. I want to thank Dr. Mackie for joining us today. This has been a particularly heavy weekend for him and the folks down at Middlesex London Health Unit as we've moved into a new stage of COVID protection. Middlesex London Health Unit has been charged and are charged with keeping London and Middlesex safe. And it never, in my experience, has this been more important in this once in a generation pandemic. So I want to thank Dr. Mackie and the folks that work with him in their tireless efforts, because I know it's been a lot of long nights and days for the last 9 or 10 months and more to come. What I'd like to do is introduce Dr. Mackie to give us an update of where we're at. And if you have questions for Dr. Mackie, if you could text them, and then I will read those out, Dr. Mackie, to address. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mackie.
Thank you very much, Steve and Josh. It's a real pleasure to be here. Really glad that I'm able to speak with so many of your constituents today. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone in the area around Oak Ridge Arena. This was the first assessment center that was set up in the London Middlesex area, quickly joined by Carling Heights within about a week. And that assessment center has been an incredibly important part in the fight against COVID, making sure people get testing as quickly as possible. There have been lots of hurdles around that, but your support as a community has been really important there. And I know that site has put a number of burdens on that neighborhood, particularly around managing traffic and vehicles blocking driveways and things like that. So you folks have done more than your fair share. So thank you very much. I also want to say that thank you to everyone here on the call because London has been doing incredibly well compared to any other major municipality in Ontario. Our rates of COVID have been much lower than the provincial average, about half of the provincial average, and more like a third of the GTA and surrounding communities where COVID has really run rampant. Our rates here are really picking up over the past week. I'll walk you through that in a moment with slides, but I want to say thank you because it is really due to the actions of every single person in this community that London and Middlesex have fared so well so far. So with that, I'm going to see if I can share my screen here for you. And start at the beginning. Okay, I'll just look to the councillors so I can both see. Are you seeing my slide that says updates? Great. So around the world, there have been over 65 million COVID cases and over 1.5 million deaths. In Ontario, about 125,000 cases. This is as of Friday, and 3,727 deaths. Locally, we've had about 1,700 cases. It's more like 1,800 now here on Sunday, and 75 total deaths. This is what we call an epi curve, the curve of new cases by day. And this stretches all the way back to February when we had the first case in this area, which was a student coming back from Wuhan, China, one of the Western students. And that student, to her credit, was incredibly careful her whole voyage, wearing a mask through the whole trip, even though she was not sick on her trip. She had been at the bedside of her two parents in Wuhan who had been diagnosed with COVID. And so was just incredibly careful. And that's why you can see we didn't have any additional cases until well into March in this area. That first green bubble around April to May is the first wave. At the time, because of testing limitations, the testing was limited primarily to people in long-term care and hospitals. And so the case counts are lower, although the percentage positivity, so that the percentage of tests that were testing positive was higher than it is now. And then things really calmed down over the summer, and then we started to see the second wave with Western students in September, and then moving through the broader community in October. And as you may have heard, a significant outbreak at University Hospital over the last week and a half. So just where we're at right now in terms of outbreaks. Sorry, I'll just back up a bit. The last week or so, we've seen 5 out of 7 days of case counts 30 or over. Our high from the first wave was only 25. So it's really been a significant development over the last week. Our cases have been really starting to climb. UH is definitely part of that, but it isn't the whole picture. We do have a number of outbreaks. Right now, fortunately, we don't have any outbreaks in long-term care or retirement homes. That's a huge accomplishment, and due largely to the careful protection of the clients and staff there. Staff essentially are asked to do as little as possible in the community so that they're not picking things up and bringing it into work. And patients both staff and patients are masked in all those long-term cares, minimizing the number of visits. There still are essential visitors that are coming and going. But really there's been sort of a firewall put around long-term care and retirement homes, which are our most vulnerable citizens. And that's been quite successful here in London and Middlesex. We did declare this week an outbreak at a school. It's the second outbreak. And really an outbreak in this context is only one case that has been acquired at school. So a single case in a student is not considered an outbreak, but if that person transmits the disease to someone else, then there's transmission at school, and so we call it an outbreak. In 2 million student days across all the 4 school boards we have here, public, Catholic, and then French public, French Catholic, we've only had 2 cases of COVID acquired in schools. So over 40 cases in schools, but almost all those were acquired from a family member at home. So essentially schools are doing really well in this area. This is some of the charts around the University Hospital. There were, as of Friday, 124 cases. We're now over 140. And split roughly evenly among staff and patients. And as of Friday, 11 deaths were now 12. So this is a very unfortunate situation where there were some breakdowns in terms of safety measures in some very high-risk wards, internal medicine wards at UH, and that has ended up generating a lot of cases. And unfortunately, because those people are so sick, in order to be on those wards, we've seen a number of deaths in that population. Most of the deaths have been, if you look at the second chart, most of the deaths are in that green, which is 4IP, the inpatient ward, or also known as internal medicine ward on the 4th floor at University Hospital, but a number of other wards affected there. Huge outbreak measures have been put in place as of November 22nd and strengthened that following week. A whole bunch of additional measures, including putting masks on all patients there, something called work quarantine, which is quite a dramatic public health measure where staff are allowed to work. So staff that are working on these outbreak wards, everyone has been tested, by the way, so anyone who's tested positive is not working. But if they haven't been tested positive, it's still quite possible they've been exposed to a case. So they're allowed to go to work because the hospitals rely on them, but they're essentially quarantined other than that. They're at work and they're at home and they're nowhere else in between. So work quarantine for all of the staff involved in all of those outbreak wards. We pulled students out of the hospital. We're doing something called cohorting staff so that they're not allowed to work in multiple units or multiple facilities. Lots and lots of really strong outbreak control measures. And the cases that we're diagnosing now are mainly because of the increased testing. So testing all 3,000 staff in the hospital. We're still finding some cases that way, but we're not seeing a lot of additional spread that way. So that's a very good thing. This is just the deaths by outcome date. So across the University Hospital outbreak. So we did have that first death on November 22nd, and then unfortunately, significant spikes towards the end of November, beginning of December. 4 deaths per day is the highest we had at the peak of wave 1 as well. So this is comparable to where we are at peak of wave 1. By age in this outbreak, you can see the bottom left chart, vast majority of patients in their 70s or 80s, whereas staff in the 20s and 30s. And then gender, slightly more females than males among patients are affected, which is common, what we see in our community. Staff, because the staff are primarily female, you do see a higher case count there among female staff. So there are a number of other outbreaks. The Saugeen Maitland Hall outbreak is being declared over floor by floor. And they've been doing quite well. No cases for the last couple of weeks. We're keeping that outbreak on the books for another 2 weeks just to make sure that we're monitoring closely and the outbreak measures stay in place. Perth Hall is another Western residence where there has been an outbreak, and that hasn't had a case in quite some time. There are also a number of additional workplace outbreaks. We announced one of them on Friday at a shawarma shop, Swish Shawarma. And that there were 3 staff there. Being a customer at a place where there's a outbreak, even in retail, is generally considered very low risk. The exception would be where there's a lot of face-to-face contact, like a personal service setting, maybe a hair salon or nail salon. Other than that, if you're just walking through a store where there's somebody that's sick, the amount of exposure you have to that person is unlikely to result in an illness. But because it is a place of a food service establishment, we made that outbreak public. There's another one in a retail environment, small retail environment, that really is zero risk to public. So we haven't even declared that publicly. What we do is still declared an outbreak, and we implement outbreak control measures there, but it doesn't require public notification. So what we're hoping that people can do right now, first of all, please try to stay safe and help others to do the same. Stay positive and help others to do the same. We're hearing so much about COVID burnout, and indeed that's been a major factor in many of the outbreaks, including the outbreak at University Hospital. People get tired of the restrictions, particularly people with high stress roles, public facing or serving the public. And what ends up happening is that they let their guard down when they're on breaks or on social time. And so it's really important for all of us to stay positive and help others to stay positive, to give us that resilience, that energy we need to keep doing what we need to do. Second of all, set a great example. This slide was from our presentation on Friday to public health workers, but I think all of us have the opportunity for leadership right now. People are really looking for guidance. They're looking to have somebody, help them through this really complex and difficult phase of our lives and of our society. And if we set a great example in terms of, hosting online events, keeping all of our interactions as low risk as possible, that helps to set a new culture that we need in this time of COVID, where we are placing our safety and the safety of others as a top priority. We know that, when we take actions like bringing large parties together or multiple households together, it's just an ideal opportunity. Indoor gatherings are an ideal opportunity for COVID to spread. You do have face-to-face prolonged exposure, and that's what COVID is looking for. So let's do our best to set a new culture that is really about safety, where we are planning those low-risk gatherings. Online or a small number of people outside is so much safer than large groups indoors. Also, take care of yourself. Please take the steps you need to maintain your mental health and wellness, because those things are incredibly important assets. That your general health is a good predictor of how you're going to do with COVID, and your mental health is a good predictor in terms of how well you're likely to keep up the appropriate safety precautions that we all need to do. So take care of yourself in this time as well. So unfortunately, with the significant increases in cases we've seen over the last week, our region is moving from the yellow protect level of restrictions to the orange restrict level. This is part of the provincial framework. There are 5 levels. There's green, yellow, orange, red, and then lockdown, which is gray. And so we're moving from level 2, which we've been fortunate to be able to stay at for some time, up to level 3, which the change isn't really dramatic. The change is things like personal service settings where the mask has to be removed to provide the service, like makeup or beard trimmings or facial tattoos. Those services cannot be provided. Otherwise, it's relatively minor tweaks, things like hours of operation for restaurants and bars, like hours of when alcohol can be served, that have been reduced in restaurants, bars, and other settings. The unfortunate reality is that the case counts we've had over the past week mean that we may move up to the red level of restrictions sometime soon. That would be a dramatic change. There's a lot of closures at that stage. There's a lot of limits of number of people indoors at one time in any event space, with few exceptions around religious services. So let's hope that we're able to keep those numbers down. The framework, in order to move between different levels, has a number of criteria, including how the disease is spreading, but also how is healthcare going in the community? What's the public health capacity like to do all of the outbreak management, case management, contact tracing that is needed to be done? So we're kind of going to be meeting some of those and not all. It's really the decision of when to move the community between orange and red is made by cabinet, the provincial cabinet. The framework's there to guide that, but it is a cabinet decision, so we'll see what happens over the next week. This change from yellow to orange happens tonight, 12:01 a.m. Monday morning, technically. So these are the indicators and threshold levels. I won't go into them in detail, but this is what I was referencing before. Off to the left on this slide, there is a green area where we were one of the last communities to move out of green. But so yeah, now moving from the protect to the restrict, from the yellow to the orange level. I've kind of talked through the new quarantine. So new quarantine directions is a separate issue. This is around people who are family or household or other close contacts of people who are meeting the criteria for COVID testing. So if an individual has significant COVID symptoms like a fever or a new cough, and they qualify for COVID testing at the assessment centers, so anyone can get tested at some of the pharmacies now, but in terms of the assessment centers, these are people with symptoms. And if you do have symptoms of COVID, we're now asking folks to quarantine their household members as well, so that the testing does come back very quickly, usually 24 to 48 hours. So it shouldn't be a significant burden, but we are asking anyone who lives in a household with somebody who's getting tested for COVID to stay home until that test result comes back. The reason this is changing is because we do have a significantly higher likelihood. So if you got tested in the summer, even if you had symptoms, the likelihood of testing positive was less than 1%. Nowadays, that's really creeping up. It's around the 3 to 5% in this area, depending on the day. And so at that point, the likelihood of having COVID when you have symptoms is high enough that we've asked that your family members stay home as well. This is evidence that really makes a difference. Ottawa implemented this, and they're one of the few larger communities in Ontario that have been able to tackle their second wave and really bring their numbers back down, whereas they continue to skyrocket in other places. And we'll start rolling that out on December, so that when we get lab results for, when people are coming in for lab testing at the assessment centers, staff there will be asking them to ask their family members to stay home. So that's an issue. Some holiday messaging. So again, this is exactly when we need to start making those new COVID level traditions and setting a new COVID culture that is really about safety. And so what we've done is recognizing that some people will still gather, we've got 3 sets of activities here. The green would be activities that are as safe as possible. Things like having a gathering online instead of in person. Mail or drop off gifts, donate to local charities, and you know, play Christmas games, watch a Christmas movie together, but remotely from your own home. Yellow are activities where there is some risk, but they can be done more safely. So this would be things like outdoor gatherings with people from a different household. Even from your family, they're still considered a different household if they don't live in your house. So this would be, you know, tips there are things like maintaining 2 meters distance from everyone, keeping separate food and drinks, keeping gatherings short so you don't have enough face-to-face contact in order to spread the illness. In terms of the unsafe activities, this would be any indoor gathering with anyone who's not part of your household. And we're really recommending against inviting guests into your home, being closer than 2 meters from people, even if masked, sharing food, travel for non-essential reasons. So, sorry, one other thing I want to mention in the yellow zone, if you're getting a small group of adults together to, you know, maybe go for a winter hike, there's a good chance you can keep 2 meters apart. Once you start bringing children into the picture, it's much more difficult. And so we're recommending that if you are gathering, even outdoors with children, that you consider asking people to wear masks for that. So with that, I'm going to pause. Happy to take any questions. And I'll actually turn off my screen share. There we go. Turn it back over to you folks.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Mackie. That was a very thorough presentation to kind of give us an idea of where we're at and, you know, where we could be headed. We have a lot of questions, as you can imagine. Some you've already answered. Let's get the first one here. You addressed this one. Do you anticipate London moving to red before Christmas, and what needs to happen before this will occur? You have addressed that already. Will Middlesex Health shave access to rapid testing equipment / kits? And if so, who will it be used for?
Thanks for the question. So rapid tests, we have been offered access to rapid tests by the province. There is a major issue with rapid tests in that they're about half as sensitive as the lab test. So you can get results back very quickly, but they miss about half of cases. So if your rapid test is positive, then it's, you know, fairly predictive. It's likely that you are positive. But if your rapid test is negative, that doesn't mean you're necessarily negative. So there's a real risk there that people get a rapid test done and then feel like they are safe, maybe go visit a relative that's at higher risk and actually end up spreading the illness. The other issue around rapid tests, the rapid test that Ontario has access to still requires an NP swab, so it can't be self-administered like the Swish test out in BC, for example. It still requires a swab to be placed pretty deep into the nose and something you can't do yourself. So, you know, if the rapid tests were a lot more accurate, or it could be done, you know, at home or by people in the community, I think it would really add something. At this point, we're looking for, you know, what is the best application of this test? It might be in schools or post-secondary, but, you know, we wouldn't want to replace the assessment center testing, which is very accurate and very quick. We're getting results back again 24 to 48 hours, or any of the other, you know, testing for screening purposes.
Thank you. Here's the next question. With the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, who is under much greater restrictions, there are reportedly bus groups coming to London to shop, etc. How do we stop this and the related potential spread from that area to ours?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. At this point, the provincial lockdown level doesn't have an actual regulation restriction travel. It's really an advisory to only travel for essential purposes. So we don't have a great legal tool at this point. We have heard that rumor as well. We haven't seen it directly, but if it is occurring, it's quite concerning. And certainly something we'll be watching for. So if anyone has hard evidence of that, please do let the health unit know, because if we need to, we'll try to find some way of intervening. I was asked by city staff over the last week or so about should they be taking bookings from people who maybe want to come here from the GTA to have a larger wedding or something like that, and advised against it. So city staff have stopped doing that.
Thank you. Next question. Has the planning process begun about how vaccination might look like in London? I know it's a way off, but has the planning process begun, or will that be provincial?
Thanks for the question. So there's a federal planning process, there's a provincial planning process, and we're of course ready and willing to do our part. In the past, large vaccination campaigns have been run by local public health. The H1N1 swine flu pandemic in 2009, for example. At this point, it's not clear who will be managing things on the ground. We've heard that it may be the hospitals. There was just an announcement this past week about a provincial advisor and an advisory committee around vaccination planning. So that should move ahead very quickly. We do expect to have some vaccine in the province some point in January, although the date literally changes, by the day, if not by the hour. And by the end of the first quarter, we hope to have enough doses to cover, the highest risk groups, for example, staff and residents in long-term care. But that planning is all still ongoing. There are some real logistical hurdles with at least one of the vaccines. There are 3 at this point that have demonstrated some effectiveness. The first out of the gate was a vaccine that requires ultra low temperature fridges, where the freezer keeps the vaccine as cold as 70 degrees and or dry ice, which is very expensive. So you can imagine that that's a major logistical challenge. But yeah, I would anticipate that we should have more information over the next couple of weeks about starting that vaccination planning process. The results of the vaccines have proven better than expected. 2 of those vaccines, well over 90% effective. The third in the 70 to 90 range, depending on the dosing. But those are short-term. That one of the issues with coronaviruses in general is immunity doesn't always last very long. So it might be something where, like the annual flu shot, where we do need to get boosters every year, or even more frequently. We don't know any of that yet.
Dr. Mackie, are you concerned about a spike in cases in late January when holidays are over for everyone and students return? Also, are the testing sites at pharmacies being used as intended?
Yeah, so we're getting decent uptake, I would say, in the pharmacies. So pharmacies would be for people, for example, who need to get screened in order to visit a loved one in a long-term care facility. So someone that doesn't have symptoms but still has a legitimate need to get tested, or going in for surgery, something like that, where the surgeon has asked for a test. And it's great to see that. I'm sorry, there was a 2-parter. What was the other part to the question, Councillor?
Are the testing sites at pharmacies being used as intended?
Yeah, I would say they're being used pretty well at this point.
The next question is, so if there is limited outbreaks in schools and the majority of cases have been through Western and University Hospital, why are small businesses with 0 cases and using all protective measures being punished? Isn't the mental health of children, specifically sports, being weighed over the risk when there has been almost 0 cases? Let's use data instead of blanket restrictions.
I appreciate the comment. I've actually heard something similar a few places, and I wonder if there's been some media that have taken this angle. It's not true at all that there haven't been cases associated with small businesses or sports. In our area, small businesses have hosted the majority of outbreaks. Most of those outbreaks have been relatively small, half a dozen cases or less, but they definitely have been there. And again, most of those are among staff. So we haven't seen a lot of transmission to customers in those business settings. Also, there's really not a lot of punishment happening right now with small businesses under even the orange level restrictions. If we go to red, that is a different ballgame. But the restrictions right now are pretty minimal. And, there are some restrictions on sports. that we've maintained locally, and there are only really a couple of examples. You know, there's a really excellent, top-notch, synchronized skating program that doesn't quite fit within our regs because of the large number of skaters on the ice at the same time. And then certain yoga studios that really cram people into smaller spaces have had trouble meeting the new provincial regulations that came into place, and also some of our local regulations. Other than that, most businesses are able to operate as expected just now.
Can you comment on if and when international travelers will be required to pay for their testing? Currently, travelers on the list for being able to access assessment centers. So I think, you know, it's free testing for those that are traveling. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. The traditionally in Canada, healthcare costs associated with travel, particularly discretionary costs, are not covered by the provincial health insurance plans. For example, if you're going to, you know, a developing country, you need to get a yellow fever vaccine or any other vaccine for travel, you'd have to pay for that out of pocket, including the visit as well as the vaccine. In this situation, the government has taken a slightly different approach because of the risks of not doing so. Essentially, the testing has been controlled by the government so that you can only get tested at certain places. So there's no way to go out and purchase your own test if you wanted to. And there's a risk to the general population if that testing doesn't occur. So the government's decided that this is something that is worthwhile paying for.
And so the question here is regarding school. Does that mean the school boards will be changing the rules too? Right now, if someone has symptoms, siblings can still go to school. I'm not sure if that's referring to going to Orange or in general. So put that over to you, Dr. Mackie.
Yeah, so we will, when a student comes in to get tested, we will be counseling that family to keep the other students home as well. The schools are working under the provincial guidelines, which aren't going to be changing in exactly the same way. So I don't think we've worked out exactly whether it will be, you know, whether the schools will be enforcing that, but certainly that would be the direction that comes from public health at the time.
Thank you. Here's another question. Dr. Mackie, thank you for the update. Do we have a London COVID enforcement team that can work with provincial agencies to ensure enforcement of many of the provincial regulations? Also, what are we doing to proactively ensure that the curve is reversing in the London area? Can you have the Ministry of Health also introduce enhanced instructions to help?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So in terms of enforcement, actually the most efficient way to get enforcement is to email. There's a City of London address, covidorderconcerns@london.ca. And that email address is actually monitored 24/7. So, you know, if your neighbor's having a crazy house party at 2 in the morning, you can email covidorderconcerns@london.ca, and that you will get a response. So that's the quickest way. I see that the councillor has put that into the chat box, so you can grab that email address there. In terms of being proactive, the additional restrictions, if we move into higher levels, as we move into higher levels, I should say, in the provincial framework, really are designed to try and get rates back down again. So that framework is really helpful. It's relatively automated, so that there isn't as much, you know, wrangling needed. And the restrictions do make a difference. We know that they will help things like reduce the close contacts. So all of that does help. The provincial government's also started doing some targeted, what I would call kind of a pilot program around enforcement that does provide additional boots on the ground for communities that do have higher rates. And so that can help as well.
Thank you. Individuals are still visiting public gyms. Will the Middlesex London Health Unit be providing stricter guidelines?
Yeah, so in terms of gym facilities, Good Life, the YMCA, that sort of thing, those are affected more at the red level of restrictions. So if we get to the red level of restrictions, then what you see is a weight room can only have 10 people in it, and people must be able to keep distant even if there are that many folks there. It really reduces the number of people that are able to be in the facility overall. So right now the provincial restrictions have 10 people per class as a maximum but you could have like that's in each room. At the red level, you only have 10 per class overall. So if you have multiple rooms, you can't have more people. Those sorts of things come into play at the red level.
Why is there no temperature testing at retail stores or restaurants?
Yeah, so temperature screening has shown to be not particularly helpful. And so, it can potentially be used in some places to some degree of effect, but it doesn't replace, monitoring people for symptoms, self-monitoring, self-screening, and exclusion for symptoms. It doesn't replace, wearing a mask, reducing close contact, reducing prolonged contact less than 2 meters. All of those things make a difference together. And temperature screening, although it can potentially pick up cases, the data doesn't show that it does pick up many cases at all.
Thank you. Now, we do have a question that's going to pivot away from COVID and go to the injection site that has recently been approved. The question is, for all Londoners, can you explain why an injection site for illegal drugs is going ahead that is within 50 meters of Beale High School and even closer to a residential tower, which is in violation of both logic and provincial rules? Also, why should we invest $1 million plus on a building worth $500,000?
Yeah, so the supervised consumption facility, consumption treatment service facility that was approved at 446 York, this has now been approved twice by every level of government, local, provincial, and federal, including different governments of different stripes. And the reason it was proposed at the 446 York site is because it actually does meet all of the provincial and federal and local criteria. There are pretty strict rules at all 3 levels, and this site meets them all. It's the Beale facility that we're talking about is a track, so it's not 50 meters from the school. But actually, if you ask the Beale community, students and parents are pretty supportive of this sort of site. These are high school students, many of whom have seen the effects of drug or alcohol on family members, on other people in that community, or otherwise, and realize that this is an important facility. I think it's also really important for everyone to know that the consumption treatment services facility isn't just about consuming drugs. It's also about helping people connect with a whole range of other services. We have drug treatment services that are available there. We've got a connection with Mission Services across the street, who offers an abstinence-based recovery program. We've got connections with housing, connections with mental health. There's an Indigenous worker that's there once a week. So all of these different services are connected so that the site becomes not just about keeping people alive for today, which is an important goal in and of itself, but also connecting them with services that can help them move their life along in whatever way they need to when they're ready and able to do so.
Well, thank you,
Lehman.
Yes.
So this is about the time where we will need to decide whether we want to continue with a couple more questions from Dr. Mackie or move to questions for Councillor Lehman and myself. So at the risk of having a big technical error, I'm going to try launching a poll that everyone can participate in that basically will let the community decide whether you want to continue with the questions for Dr. Mackie for the last 13 minutes or whether you want to grill Councillor Lehman and myself for the last.
Councillor Morgan, I wonder if rather than being voted off the island, if I could volunteer to give the space to others. Definitely have other public health work to do, but really appreciate the question, the invitation from both of you to come on today.
Great. I think that's appropriate because we did want to leave some time at the end, and we do appreciate and value your time, and you've given us exactly what we asked for in a few minutes extra. So thanks. Could you just let us know if anybody had any pressing questions for the health unit that maybe weren't able to get answered today? Is there a good contact that you can share with them for getting them answered?
Yeah, for sure. There is a health unit inbox, help@mlhu.on.ca, and I'll put that in the chat box as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. So Councillor Lehman and I now, we have about 12 minutes left in what we scheduled for time and what we asked for you today. I'm going to stop the recording to respect people's privacy if they want to ask a question publicly.